I remember one particular student, and I told him sort of my process is I'm going to push you way out on a limb. And you're going to be out there, and that limb is just moving around and around. And he said to me, well, what happens if I fall? And I said, I'm running around underneath with a safety net. Kind of like the Outward Bound experience. They put you out there in the woods and you have to eat bugs and stuff like that. Or the IDF Special Forces training. I mean, but there are also people back there watching to make sure you just don't die.
Do you know how smart a bowling ball is? My guest today asked his students this very question. Plus, he has wonderful quotes and metaphors. For example, 1 + 1 may equal 3. Don't confuse motion with progress. And my favorite, I tend to personally become more excited about chasing ideas than about attempting to solve specific problems. And my guest today is Professor Alan Oppenheim from MIT. Who is Alan Oppenheim? Just listen to the editor of the IEEE magazine, Aryeh Nehorai. Professor Alan Oppenheim is well recognized as the founding father of the field of digital signal processing. He has had a distinguished leadership career in education and research in which he has made truly significant contributions. He has taught and advised generations of students who then became leaders in their own right. And the great example is Professor Yanina Eldar from the Weizmann Institute. His books became the official textbooks in courses on signal processing in all the universities in the world. What did we talk about? What is digital signal processing? How does it differ from signal processing? And what the future for this field in the age of AI? What is Fourier analysis? This part is the first part of the conversation. It is a little bit technical. The second part is the MOOC revolution and how one should teach science nowadays. And the last and most important and most interesting part is a unique perspective about research and mentoring. This was a wonderful conversation and I know you will love it. Hi, I'm Roy Yosevich and welcome to my channel. In this channel, I speak and converse with the most interesting people from all around the world discussing science, philosophy, artificial intelligence, and signal processing. If you find this talk interesting, please consider subscribing, hit the bell button, and be part of this great community. And now, without further ado, Professor Alan V. Oppenheim. Al Oppenheim, thank you so much for coming on the show today. How are you?
Well, I'm good, and I'm delighted to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation to have a conversation.
Believe me, I'm much, much more excited. Let me start. One of the things that you said in a recent article is, and let me quote, "Throughout my career, I have enjoyed and derived tremendous satisfaction from the symbiotic relationship between teaching, mentoring, and research in an academic setting." So I would like to delve into research, mentoring, and teaching, but let's start with research, okay? Now, you're considered to be the founding father of digital signal processing, and I'm not the one who did it. Aryeh Nehorai, the editor of IEEE Signal Processing magazine, said it. You wrote the first canonical textbook on the subject, and I think you're one of the most well-known people in the field of electrical engineering. So this is a big stuff. And my question is, how is it like to be a founding father of such a field, which is digital signal processing?
Okay, so first of all, a correction. The notion of calling me the founding father of digital signal processing is not correct. And in fact, I'm giving a talk at ICAST 2023 in Greece in a couple of weeks. And one of the things that I and some others are going to be talking about, the history of DSP. And I certainly played a strong role in the early days of DSP, but I think it's way over the top and an exaggeration to refer to me as the founding father. There's lots of people who were involved in the early days of digital signal processing. I mean, I can just mention a whole
Claude
slew of
Shannon.
names. No, I would not mention Claude Shannon. I would, so Claude Shannon, I mean, if you're going to mention Claude Shannon, you really have to mention Norbert Wiener. And then another distinction that I think is very important to draw is the distinction between signal processing and digital signal processing. And I mean, signal processing goes back, well, actually hundreds, probably thousands of years. And in terms of digital signal processing, what does that mean? It means doing signal processing using digital computation. And as I actually plan to remark in my ICAST talk, the origins of that really are kind of in the 50s when there were computers, big mainframe computers, typically built by the Defense Department, that were powerful enough to do non-real-time, very sophisticated digital computation on signals. And so in the 50s, there were lots of examples of signal processing using digital computation. That's different than what we think of today as digital signal processing in the sense of real-time embedded microprocessors that can process sophisticated radar, audio, whatever signals in real time. So those are, I guess I've sort of laid out a bunch of distinctions.
Okay, so before we argue, I think that the most important thing is to lay down the terms. And I would say that we need to say what is signal processing and why is it so important. I will give an example from a recent interview. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, for instance, is a signal that carries information about the US economy. The Wall Street Journal 30 days moving Dow average is a kind of a signal processor filtering out some of the noise of day-to-day fluctuations. So this is a very intuitive example of what signal processing is, but I think it's not what your book is all about. So if you can, explain what signal processing is in the context of electrical engineering.
What signal processing is? Well, effectively, signal processing is you have a signal and you know what a signal is, and it can be in discrete time form, can be a sequence of numbers. It could be, as people like Gauss and Galileo did, tracking the orbits of planets. And there's information in what you're measuring. And signal processing is extracting the information from those signals. And those signals can be obscured somewhat by noise. They can have complicated structures, and it takes some work to get the information out. And then there's also the other side of that, which is putting information on signals. And of course, that's what you and I are doing right now, is we're talking, and that there's information, and it's the signal that's going into the Yeti microphone. you would not be able to hear unless I either talked loud enough so that you could hear it through the atmosphere in Israel, which I doubt that you can. So it's got to be processed so that it can be transmitted at much higher frequencies, go up to satellites, come down, and then eventually it comes down to your headset or whatever your headset is. And then actually your ears are going to process it and your brain is going to process. That's all signal processing.
The idea of an audio wave that is basically a tension wave, like I think that you call it tension wave in English, but in Hebrew you call it tension wave, like one-dimensional waves, that you convert the audio wave, which is approximately 10 kilohertz, into electrical signal, and then you transmit the electrical signal over satellites, over the internet, from the US to Israel, and then you convert it again from an electrical signal to an audio wave, a sound that my ear can interpret. This is one thing of a signal processor. Another thing is like the MP3. The MP3 takes a wave file and take down or remove all the unnecessary frequency, which means that it can compress an audio file to a fraction of its original size.
Yeah, so I'm kind of separating out in my mind sort of the difference between enhancing a signal, communicating a signal, compressing a signal, and I mean, one of the things with compression, and I'm sure you well know this, is, for example, you can represent every single book in the Library of Congress and anything that's ever been written in one number.
Which is a very big number sequence of zeros and one.
No, I don't have zeros and ones. If I give you enough digits in the number, there are an infinite number of digits, and so I can record in that one number an infinite amount of information. The problem is that's not very robust. Because by the time you get out to the millionth digit, you think of the accuracy of the number pi. That number, in effect, has an infinite amount of information in it because it takes an infinite number of digits to accurately represent it. So one thing I guess I'm kind of eager to put on the table in this conversation is traditionally there's analog signal processing, and that's got a long history and in entertainment and information, etc. Then there's what you could call digital signal processing, and that also doing signal processing with numbers also has a long history and goes back centuries. What we call today digital signal processing is using digital computation to implement the signal processing. And so one of the things I kind of want to make clear is that the broader concept is signal processing, not analog or digital.
Oh, which is great. In fact,
yeah.
Which is great.
And I would say,
yes,
go ahead.
Okay. So
okay. Well, let me just get into the final point I want to make on this, which is as things move forward in signal processing, what you see more and more is what you could call hybrid, where it's a mix of analog and digital, to the point where before long we won't be able to tell in a signal processing system where the interface is between analog and digital. So signal processing is what we really want to be talking about.
Which is great, which leads me to the next question. In Judaism, we said there is only one God, and I think that in the context of signal processing, there is only one man, Fourier. Okay, and it seems that no, we have Laplace and we have many more, but I think that the notion or the work of Fourier is quintessential to the role of signal processing. And when Fourier did what he did, when Fourier presented his work, it was very, very, I think, far away from how we apply his theories right now. Would you agree?
Not entirely. No, I would say Fourier was, of course, very, very important. But how about Taylor? Taylor's theorem and polynomials. So the idea of representing a function, so you could say a signal, as a linear combination of a subset of basis signals. Of course, that's what Taylor's theorem does. And that basic concept is what sort of underlies, obviously, Fourier transforms. Now, I think I've sort of expressed this to you in a number of emails we've had back and forth, but I guess I'm going to stick it into this interview.
No. Because I think, just a second, I think it is tremendously important. The main idea, which is correct, which holds true for Taylor and for Fourier, is the idea that you can take a complex signal and separate it to its basic components. This, I think, is the basic premise of what signal processing is all about. You take a complex signal and then say, okay, I can separate, I can make this complex signal is built out of many simpler signals, and I can work with each simpler signals separately, which simplifies the process. Is it, can I say it?
Well, it either simplifies or complicates, because the question is, what are the basic components that you want to decompose something into? And depending on how you pick those components, let me give you an example. Take a simple sinusoidal signal. And I say, I'm going to decompose that into sinusoidal signals. Well, it only takes one. So it's defined by three numbers: amplitude, frequency, and phase. Now I say, take a sinusoidal signal and decompose it into periodic square waves. That's like the Hadamard transform. It's going to take an infinite number of those basis functions. So here's the question. I bring this up all the time when I'm talking to students or anybody. What's the importance of decomposing a signal into sinusoidal components?
Before I give an answer, I want to present or to clarify the question with your permission, okay? So I have a quote from another book about digital signal processing. It's called The Engineer Guide to Digital Signal Processing. And in this book, he said the following thing. Fourier was interested in heat propagation and presented a paper in 1807 to the Institut de France on the use of sinusoid to represent temperature distributions. The paper contained the controversial claim that any continuous periodic signal could be represented as a sum of properly chosen sinusoidal waves. Among the reviewers were two of history's most famous mathematicians, Lagrange and Laplace, which is very bad if you write a paper that Lagrange and Laplace will be your reviewers. While Laplace and other reviewers voted to publish the paper, Lagrange adamantly protested. For nearly 50 years, Lagrange had insisted that such an approach could not be used to represent signals with corners, what we mean like square wave. And then he said, who was right, Lagrange or Laplace? It's a split decision. Lagrange was correct in his assertion that a summation of sinusoids cannot be a signal with a corner. However, you can get very close. So the idea is that you can take any function, even a unit function, a square wave, and say I can transform it into sum of sine and cosines. This is basically what Fourier said, and this was a controversial claim.
Well, I'm very well aware of the claim. Actually, as it happened this week, I was reviewing a column for Signal Processing magazine that talks very specifically about Fourier and Lagrange. So the answer, my comment to that is a yes and a no. So if you take, let's say, a square wave, which has corners, obviously, and you decompose it into, so you do a Fourier analysis on it, and then you take all those Fourier components, let's say it's a periodic square wave, you take those Fourier components, and then you add them back up again, will you get the square wave back? And the answer is no, or yes, depending on how you do the sum. So if you do the sum by simply adding up more and more terms and accumulating them, you won't get the square wave back. You will get something that looks more and more like the square wave, but it never converges to the discontinuity. It converges to, and that's what the Gibbs phenomenon is. On the other hand, if you sum up the terms using what's called a Dirichlet, no, what's it called? The word will come back to me. But rather than adding up the terms with equal weights, you put a triangular window on them and add up those terms, then you will get it to converge to half the discontinuity. So my point is, if you do the Fourier decomposition and then you add up all the terms, you won't get quite the original function back again.
But you will be very close.
Well, depends on what very, very close means. So what this has to do with is, in functional analysis, is you have a basis and a basis for a vector space. And if it's a complete basis, then it will exactly represent everything in that space. So there is a very rich vector space to which the Fourier transform will exactly represent it, but it doesn't represent everything.
Okay.
And so it's a convergence issue. It's a mathematical issue, not of significant practical importance in signal processing, but sometimes it can bite you.
Now, I want there is something that,
let me interrupt because it popped into my head. It's called a Cesaro sum, Cesaro. So if you just take the Fourier coefficients and you sum them in a manner that's called a Cesaro sum, that's effectively putting triangular weights. And so you've got a triangle, and the more terms you include, the flatter the triangle gets. And that's a way of getting, avoiding the Gibbs phenomenon.
Yes.
So it converges differently. Yeah.
And my question is, when we teach digital signal processing, or we want to explain digital signal processing for laymen, what we want, or what we usually say, that it has a very big, powerful tool that we can convert something in the time domain into the frequency domain. Let me explain to my audience what do I mean. Let's say that I have a guitar sound in a wave file, and then I have drum sound in a waves file, and those sounds are intertwined, so I can't separate them in the wave file. What I can do is to take the sound file, convert it into a frequency domain, and say, the guitar sound is in one frequency, the drum is in another frequency. Now I can eliminate the guitar, now can I eliminate the drum, etc., etc. This is basically what we do with digital discrete Fourier transform. And my question is, when Fourier conceived the idea of Fourier transform, did he have this in mind, that we can take something in the time domain and convert it to a frequency domain? Did he have it in mind like we have it in mind?
I can't read Fourier's mind, obviously. I wish I could, but my guess is no. So there. Let me kind of, if I can expand out a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So in signal processing, I think it's important to draw a distinction between analyzing a signal or synthesizing a system, building a system. Now, in analyzing a signal, if there are, frequencies, sinusoidal signals occur kind of naturally in nature, and one of the reasons that they occur naturally in nature is that a lot of natural systems are linear and time invariant. And linear time invariant systems sort of naturally have resonances, or can be represented in terms of sinusoidal behavior, or a linear combination of sinusoidal behavior. And so it's very important. Sinusoidal signals just naturally occur, and Fourier analysis is a very efficient way of then identifying those components. Now, there's a different side to this, and that has to do with building systems. Now, we know how to build and design linear time invariant systems. And linear time invariant systems are sort of represented through convolution. The beautiful thing about Fourier analysis is that it converts the convolutional process to a multiplicative process. In other words, it's an eigenfunction decomposition. And complex exponentials are eigenfunctions of LTI systems. So if we restrict ourselves to designing algorithms and systems and building systems that are linear and time invariant, it's natural to do that in terms of an eigenfunction basis. And that's what the Fourier basis is.
But we can, if I remember correctly, and I'm not sure, we have the same property for the Laplace transform, where convolution after the transform is converted into multiplication. So it's not just the Fourier transform that gives us this great property. We have many others, and not many. We have several other transforms that do exactly the same thing.
I would say not many other.
Yes.
Yeah. So the broader statement are, what are the eigenfunctions of linear time invariant systems? They're complex exponentials. So they can be sinusoidal complex exponentials or decaying sinusoids.
For my technical audience, if you remember for your undergraduate studies, this is a e to the minus in the integral when we're doing the transform. But I think that we're heading into too much technical right now, and I want, with your permission, to zoom out, okay? With your permission, because we got a little bit more too technical. One thing that Gilbert Strang described the FFT, which is, I think, the fast way to do discrete Fourier transform. We have discrete Fourier transform, which is a tedious process, which takes approximately n to the square, O of n to the square. And then someone came up with a fast way to do it and called it FFT. Gilbert Strang describes the FFT as the most important numerical algorithm of our lifetime. And the FFT was included in the top 10 algorithm of the 20th century. So what we have now is something that probably Fourier knew, or we have a discrete Fourier transform, but it was unapplicable. It was too slow. And then many people, nevertheless,
go back to Gauss.
Yeah. Everything is going back to Gauss. And someone invented a fast way to do it. And I think that the FFT transformed the entire industry, because for the first time, it was applicable to utilize modern computers to do digital signal processing. So if you can elaborate on how important the invention of FFT to this field.
Oh boy, you're so I really do want to express myself on this, because first of all, I often refer to the FFT as the Big Bang in digital signal processing. However, and again, I'm thinking about my talk at ICAST, before the Cooley-Tukey paper was published, which really exposed the FFT algorithm, there was lots of digital signal processing going on. Now, the FFT made a lot of that computation much more efficient. So it was a wonderful, amazing, important contribution. And we should make clear to the audience that Gauss, in his notes, had the decimation and frequency algorithm pretty much explicitly laid out. Now, the problem, so this brings my mind back to when you referred to me as the founding father of DSP, which
by the way, it's not me, it's Aryeh Nehorai. I can quote it. So, but no. I think that you are when you say, okay, give me just one name that pop into your head when I say signal processing, 1, 2, 3, L. Oppenheim, and you know this is true.
Well, look, I feel humbled by that, but also embarrassed by it, because there are lots of other names. It's just that for whatever reason, my name is
And I
out
think
there.
it has to do, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that some of the reason has to do with your great signal processing course from the 80s. So you're not just a top researcher in the field, but also one of the top mentors, the top teacher in the field. So
well, okay.
There are good reasons.
Well, anyway, we're talking about the FFT.
Yes.
So the problem with the FFT is obviously it changed a lot of things in signal processing and also led to a lot of misuse.
This is
I
nice.
mean, I'll just give you a simple example. If I have a signal that's a continuous time signal, it has a lot of frequency. Let's say it's finite length. So now let's say it's band limited, and so now I can use the FFT to decompose it into a finite set of frequencies, but that doesn't mean that there's no frequency content in between those frequencies. So that's a very common misuse. One example is people misbelieve that you can do ideal low-pass filtering using the FFT. So here's what you do. You take the data, you compute the DFT, and then you multiply the DFT by 1 in the pass band that you want and 0 in the stop band that you want. And then that feels like you're doing ideal low-pass filtering, which you're not. Because if you look at what the frequency response of that equivalent filter is, it's got lots of ripples in the pass band and it's got lots of ripples in the stop band. So that's one misuse that I've commonly come across.
But Al, I think that your critique applies to the DFT in general, not just to the FFT.
Of course.
No, my question or the idea is, and I want to convey it to my audience because not all of my audience read cover to cover your book, okay? Not all of them. Not all of them.
Really?
Not all of them. Not all of them.
Oh, well, they should.
We are waiting. You were waiting for the Hebrew version. Let's try to say super resolution in Hebrew. The idea is that we had an algorithm that computes something in n squared.
Right.
And we converted it, we made it more efficient to n log n. And the conversion from n squared to n log n made, like what you said, a big bang in digital signal processing. Yeah. And this is mind-blowing. The idea is that, again, this is so important. N squared in practical, we can't use it. N log n, everyone uses. This is
but amazing. Now can I give you a misuse of the FFT?
Yes.
So okay. So suppose I have a signal, fairly complicated, rich in frequencies, but I only want to analyze it at 3 frequencies. It's got 10,000 frequencies in it, but I only want to analyze it at 3 frequencies. Should I use the FFT? No. What I should use is, but people do. So what I often see, and it kind of makes me laugh, is they'll take this long piece of data, 40,000 points. They will compute a 40,000 FFT. So that takes 40,000 log 40,000. And then they'll throw away most of the frequency points because all they care about is 3 frequencies. It's much more efficient to just simply use what what's often referred to as the Gertzel algorithm, but that's a fancy name for basically take the inner product of the data with the three frequencies that you want to compute. And what that'll take is it'll take 3 times n to do the computation.
Okay, so because you, okay, I think it again went too technical, and I want to zoom out to what you just said, that people take the FFT and use it like a hammer. And in your in your research lab, you utilized signal processing in the context of chaos theory and quantum mechanics and simple atoms and fractal geometry and many other fields that you utilize signal processing in their context. Yonina Eldar is a great example of quantum mechanics and signal processing, and we have many others. And my question is, with the rise of deep learning, okay, that we use deep learning as a tool, which is very similar to signal processing. So I can use deep learning in the context of quantum mechanics and fractal geometry and chaos theory. What do you think, or would you think that deep learning will replace the use of signal processing? I can give you an example from like a recent example for my research. We try to distinguish between internet packets, you know, to distinguish between Google Docs and YouTube videos. And we thought about, you know, maybe we can use a wavelet transform, and then a random forest, very simple random forest classifier outperform this wavelet transform much better. And my question is the era of digital signal processing, you know, is going to be replaced by deep learning, or there will be something or fundamental that you cannot achieve with deep learning, and you must use the conventional classical methods of signal processing?
Well, okay, so let me react first of all to say that in any field, the classical, typical techniques will be and should be displaced as time goes on. So when you refer to the sort of classical methods, I mean, obviously things evolve. And so again, we're talking about signal processing, not digital signal processing. So let me just say that one of my common preferred favorite phrases is there will always be signals, they'll always need processing, and there will always be new mathematics and new technologies for doing the processing. So as signal processors, our future is guaranteed. Now, the technologies will change, the mathematics will change. So that kind of brings me to, I do want to kind of comment about deep learning and neural nets, but let me first see if you kind of want to respond to what I just said.
I think, you know, if you define that there will be always signals, and those signals will always need to be processed, hence or thus signal processing will always prosper, kudos, I'm totally with you. But this is not what I ask. And you know, this is like, it's like you're playing with the words. I totally agree. But my question is, do you think that in the near future, deep learning techniques will replace FFT?
Well,
for example, yeah, just like as a figure of speech.
That's like asking me, do I think in the long term apples can replace oranges? So first of all, deep learning. I don't know where to start my sort of commentary here, but One of the things that I want to definitely sort of comment on is neural nets and deep neural nets, and that's kind of what you're calling deep learning, signal processing systems that are basically designed through stochastic gradient and training on data, just naturally uncover some very exciting and surprising things. Now, the question becomes, what does that system, can that system, now that there's an existence proof that you can recognize people from dogs or whatever with a neural net, does it make sense to try to understand more fundamentally what it is that that neural net was doing? And the analogy I use when I'm talking about this often is the difference between theoretical physics and experimental physics. So the experimentalist goes in there and discovers some new amazing thing in the lab, and that establishes an existence proof for this phenomenon. The theoretical physicist then can get very excited about that, because theoretical physicist says, I want to understand why that is, now that we know that such and such is true. So a lot of what's going on in the signal processing community now is, and I know that Unina Eldar is very much involved in this, is trying to unroll what it is that that these neural nets are doing. And sometimes you can't quite do it. But, you know, it's like people discover that water runs downhill. And that's amazing. I mean, people discovered that a gazillion years ago. And then they say, man, I can really make use of that. I'm going to put my farm at the bottom of a hill rather than at the top of a hill. And I don't care why water runs down the hill. I just know that all I got to do is plant my fields at the bottom of the hill. And then somebody else comes along and say, well, I really want to understand why that is and generalize it, et cetera. So that's a lot of what's going on now in trying to understand better with deep learning and neural nets, what it is that the system is eventually doing with these nonlinear weights and et cetera. And it's kind of exciting. And to ask the question, is that going to replace the FFT, is definitely like asking, are apples going to replace oranges, in my mind.
Okay, so please let me recap your answer, because I think it is very important, okay? And let me see if I got it correctly. What I asked was, in the experimental things, up until now, up until 10 years ago, we had like the conventional methods of doing things in the realm of digital signal processing, and it involves audio, video, images, etc. Nowadays, you know, and many of the problems that we once approach with the tools of digital signal processing, we now approach with the tools of deep learning. But what you say is something that is fundamentally different. You say, listen, we don't know how deep neural networks works. The main idea is that we know what FFT does, but we have no idea about what those giant transformers with 200 zillion parameters does. And what we want to do, let's say that those machines, those networks, those deep learning models can outperform many things. We want to use the mathematical tools that we have, for example, digital signal processing, in order to understand what is being done under the hood of those systems. And in this trajectory, we need math. And signal processing has a set of tools that you say, I believe will be useful in analyzing what is going under the hood of those systems. Is it fair to recap like this?
Yeah, that's really well said, and I want to expand it a little bit. So one of the problems we have in signal processing is we've got the tools for linear mathematics and in fact, linear time invariant mathematics. We don't have the tools for nonlinear mathematics. What I believe in the context of my statement, there will always be new mathematics and new technologies, is if I were going to point to a mathematical area that will be rich in bringing the field forward, it's nonlinear mathematics. And the very interesting thing, nonlinear math is very hard. But, you know, the interesting thing about the deep neural nets is that they are exploiting nonlinearities. And so in some sense, it's kind of a demonstration that looking for ways of exploiting nonlinear mathematics is likely to be very, very fruitful moving forward.
What you just said is many people consider the true power of deep learning in those activation function, in this nonlinearity, because once you pass the linear boundaries, like the sky is not the limit anymore. So we will need the nonlinear math to try and understand and grasp how can we formulate what happens inside those systems. Okay? Yes?
Well, but wait a minute. It's not necessarily what's happening inside the deep neural net. What I'm saying is independent of neural nets. There's opportunity, I believe, in looking for deeply into nonlinear mathematics to find tools that can be as powerful as Fourier analysis is and convolution is and other things. So that's what I tried to do in my doctoral thesis. Very narrow use of nonlinearity, but it made a big difference.
Wow, this is great. Now, we talked about, we said that we're going to talk about teaching, research, and mentoring. I think that research we are done. And teaching, I want to start. And you are I think, one of the first MOOC teachers, massive open online course. MIT OpenCourseWare, I think, was founded at 2003. YouTube was founded 2 years later. But in the 80s, we had a course, okay?
It was the late
VHS.
70s, actually.
Yeah. When?
It was the late 70s.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And it was digital, and it was signal processing. It was Oppenheim with much more hair and a mustache. Okay. Mustache, yeah. So just a second. This is you. This is you in the 70s. Now, those courses, this course was great, and this was, I think, the first massive open online course. So my question is, how did you come to invent or to videotape this course? Because it wasn't like I'm going to videotape you during a lecture. It was a course specifically designed to be taught as in front of a camera, not in front of students.
Well, it had its origin in the course that was taught in front of students. So I started the digital signal processing course at MIT in 1969. And I was writing lecture notes, and then Ron Schaefer joined me as a co-author, and then we wrote a book. And there at MIT there was something called the Center for Advanced Engineering Studies, and they were making video courses based on classroom courses at MIT. And so there are quite a number of those. And so they asked me to make one of these set of videos out of my digital signal processing course, which is what I did.
Can I show a 30-second demonstration from the course, please? So, yes.
You mean you're gonna show it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. 30
seconds. Okay, now this is the digital signal processing MIT Open Courseware, and in the video lecture we have all the lectures, and I watched those lectures, and this is great. And yes, and you have like just a second. And you used, a tape recorder and all sorts of things, like, things to enrich the class. And my question is, now in 2012, the MOOC revelation came about, and we have Coursera, edX, right, Udacity, Daphne Koller, Anata Goral, many others. And in retrospective, after did this course, and after you did another course in edX about digital signal processing,
right,
what do you think about this progress in digital education?
Well, there are a bunch of comments I can make about that. One is that an advantage of having really good courses online or in video form, when they were, is really good, well put together courses presented by really good teachers are much better by orders of magnitude than somebody who doesn't really know the material well and doesn't know how to present it, getting up in front of a bunch of students and interacting with them and lecturing to them. So that's one aspect of it, is that having that material sort of widely available in a well-packaged form is better. Now, having a well-prepared course presented by a talented presenter live is better than having the video presented, because one of the aspects of teaching that I sort of try to draw a distinction between, in my mind, is like open loop teaching versus closed loop teaching.
What do you mean?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is open loop teaching is if you were watching my video course, you're watching it open loop, basically. You don't have a chance to raise your hand and ask a question. I don't have an opportunity to look at the classroom and see puzzled looks and try to say, wait a minute, let's make sure you got this point that I was just trying to make. So that's closed loop. Now, one of the things I actually found very interesting when after I did the MOOC at MIT, and I had a lot of those online finger exercises. So I found when I was lecturing that I would put up questions, simple questions, and I was able to put up a histogram of the students' answers. in real time. What I found really interesting is the feedback to me as a lecturer, where I thought I had explained a topic in such a
Flawlessly.
beautiful, yeah, in a beautifully simple way. And then I put up this simple question, and clearly they're confused. So I got to stop and say, wait a minute.
It's like
Let's
the
sort
old
this.
joke about the old professor and say, I'm teaching the same stuff for over 20
Yeah,
years and the
exactly.
students still don't understand.
And they just don't get it. Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's the flip side where I've got this very complicated thing, and I felt like I didn't explain it well. And then I put up the problem, and it seems like everybody got it. And so, wow, now I can speed up the lecture.
Let me
It brings
ask
to
it.
mind, it
Let me
brings to
ask it
mind, by the way,
more bluntly. Let me ask it more bluntly. Next semester, I need to teach a course about digital signal processing.
yeah.
Why on earth should I need to do it when there is Al Oppenheim, not on OpenCourseWare, on edX? How can anyone at Tel Aviv University compete with Gilbert Strang on linear algebra? Seriously.
Uh,
I kid you not, seriously, how can anyone compete with Gilbert Strang?
well, it's not an issue of competing.
But we have
So,
Gilbert Strang online
yeah,
and free.
yeah, no. I totally agree with that. The thing is, the way to teach it is to utilize Gil Strang's lectures, but then as the teacher, um, interact with the students on where they're confused and where they're not. Uh, and because watching Gil Strang's lecture, that's open loop.
Basically, what you say, let's move to the flip class paradigm where Gilbert Strang will going to deliver the lecture. I'm, as a lecturer, going to be basically, don't be offended, a TA, a teacher assistant for Gilbert Strang, and this will be much better. But you know that it doesn't happen, not just in Israel, in most universities in the US. We don't utilize your course as a flip classroom, and we don't utilize Gilbert Strang course as a flip classroom. And my question is why?
Because the teaching model is broken. So there is, so the right teaching model is the flipped classroom. Even going back before MOOCs and videos, the ideal thing, if there's a good textbook, is before the students come to class, you ask them to read such and such sections. And then in the class, you put context around it, you discuss where they're confused, where they're not confused. I mean, that is the flipped classroom. That's the way it should work. What doesn't work, even though it's what, and I have to say, I know lots of people at Tel Aviv University who teach this way. They go into the classroom with their detailed mathematical notes. They go up to the blackboard. They put down all this complex math. The students dutifully copy down that 1 + 1 = 7. Mark that might be on the exam. And that's open loop lecturing by bad lecturers. So yeah, you're right. The model doesn't work. The other thing that's different these days, by the way, is that the characteristics of the students have changed. Because students now, first of all, they want content for free. Second of all, they are very reluctant to be required to be at a certain place at a certain time. So it makes the model has to be a different model.
would you say, and I'm being very, very cautious about right now, that nowadays students, and you teach over, and you have taught over 40 years, so you have your perspective, that nowadays students are in a way more lazy, in such a way that you say, okay, before I'm going to give you reading assignments, but they will not comply with the reading assignments, and 30 years ago they did. Or you don't see any difference in the laziness. I'm sorry, because I really don't have another word, but in the laziness of the student. And before you answer, I must say that you teach at MIT, which means that you get the crème de la crème of students from all around the world. So basically what you say doesn't encapsulate the entire population of US students.
Well, lazy, I don't think is the right word. I would say impatient.
Oh.
And students are much more used to multitasking. And yeah, so the characteristics of the, and by the way, that's not all the students, but it's a certain percentage. And, it goes back, I remember when I was an undergrad, where a lot of the focus in a course could very well be on don't help me understand this deeply. Just tell me what's going to be on the quiz, because I want to get an A in the course.
You say in your article, Reflection After 50 plus years in the classroom, or you quoted one of your students that said about textbook. A problem that I personally have with textbook is that using them can often be cumbersome. More typically, I consult a source because I have a question on some specific aspect of the material. If what I'm searching for exactly corresponds to a section in a textbook, then the textbook works well. However, if it's just few paragraphs within a textbook, it can be tedious and cumbersome to find the exact information that I'm looking for. Okay? And basically, if the textbook doesn't give me immediately what I want, I'm not going to use it. And this is not my words. This is the words of a student from MIT that you quote in your article.
And I agree with the student. The thing is that a textbook is a very difficult way of learning material for the first time. And certainly using a textbook open loop by yourself. I mean, if I want to learn quantum mechanics, which I've wanted to learn and have been, just taking a textbook and trying to learn it from that is way too difficult. So a textbook is an adjunct to additional resources. And what's the best resources? One of the best is a guide. You go to a very complex museum and try to wander around by yourself and try to figure out what's interesting and what to look at and how to interpret it is very, very difficult.
Can this guide be virtual, Al? I totally 100% agree with you. But let's say that I don't have Al Oppenheim in the next door office, and I can't consult with him on my problems with digital signal processing. Or how can I virtual this guide?
Okay, well, it could certainly be digital. I mean, it's in some sense that's what MOOCs are trying to do. Let's say you've got a format where there's a short lecture snippet, and then there's a couple of questions. Based on the student's answer to these simple exercises, in principle, a computer could get a good sense of where the student is confused and take them down a different path and then bring them eventually back. So in principle, that's all doable. But putting together that is a big task. I mean, I can tell you that the MOOC that I did was an enormous effort on my part and on my
the TA
colleague.
part.
Yeah, I wouldn't call him a TA. Tom Barron was sort of like a co-producer of it with me, but it was an enormous task.
Just because of what you just said, that MOOC, I heard Daphne Koller from, she was a founder of Coursera, and she said exactly the same thing, that if a student answer wrong to, I don't know, a simple exercise, the MOOC can take a different path. What happens in reality, that it only changes the response in the answer. Say, okay, listen, you can try this and you can try this. But the MOOC doesn't usually take a different path, because, programming a MOOC that will take different paths according to different questions or different quant question is a very tedious task. And most people say, I don't have the time, effort, energy, or money to do it. So it is doable, but the MOOC in a way was, and again, I'm an old fan of MOOCs, okay? I love MOOC. I called my second book Enlightenment version 2.0, and I teach about MOOC, and I write about MOOC, and I preach about MOOCs. But I think in some way it's a failure that we didn't utilize it. And I can see that most MOOCs are introductory level MOOCs. We don't see advanced MOOCs. And this is not because we don't have enough audience to participate in advanced MOOCs.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I think the technology theoretically is there, and it will continue forward. But I mean, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, what will that look like, let's say 100 years from now or 500 years from now? Well, it will be much more closed loop, online closed loop has got to be sort of where it's going. And I mean, that's not where it is now, obviously.
Are you familiar with Scott Young?
With what?
With Scott Young. He's an entrepreneur, and he had a challenge of taking a full bachelor degrees in computer science in MIT, just from MIT OpenCourseWare.
Oh, no, I'm not.
Yeah. And he achieved, and he finished all the tests in, I think, 18 months. But again, he's an exceptional. Okay, so we had research, we are teaching, and now I think we come to the most important part. Oppenheim the unorthodox. Your philosophy regarding research and regarding creativity and regarding empowering your students. Now, I want to start with the Yunina Eldar story, because I heard it from Yunina herself.
Okay.
And the story goes like this. Yunina Eldar went, and she was, I think, 24, and she graduated in physics and electrical engineering from Tel Aviv University with distinction. She came to you, and she wanted to do a PhD in signal processing. And what she told me is that you looked at a resume and you said that she had an undergraduate in physics, and you told her, I see that you learned physics. And then she said, yes, but what's the connection? Why do you ask it? I want to do digital signal processing. And then you said, I thought that maybe you could do something that will incorporate quantum mechanics with digital signal processing. And she looked at you, mesmerized, puzzled, and said, what do you mean? Because there is no connection whatsoever between quantum mechanics and digital signal processing. And what you told her is, I have no idea, but now you have 4 years to find out.
That's basically almost word for word. Yeah. I mean, I said to her when she said, what do you mean? I said, I don't know. Let's go find out.
And
And
this approach kept with other students as well, that you steer them towards chaos theory and digital signal processing, fractal geometry and digital signal processing, and many other fields in digital signal processing. And
you
yes,
know about the bowling ball, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
the bowling ball.
The bowling ball is when you said that you put it on top of the hill,
Yeah.
and then the bowling
Right.
ball fall down, and you say, "Wow, this is how the bowling ball does it." And you say, if I need to give a mathematical formulation to the gradient descent of the hill, it will be tremendously difficult. But the bowling ball does it effortlessly. Okay, nature has its own way to act. And how do you connect the bowling ball story to the Yunina Eldar story? Because Yunina is not a bowling ball.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, so that connection is more along the lines of how um, I get into research projects with students. Uh, so when a student is doing a project that's let's say it's a master's thesis that has a certain time frame, and it's got to be finished in a year. Um, very typically, I think of a fairly well formulated problem. But when it comes to a PhD student, uh, I think much more along the lines of chasing ideas rather than solving problems. So, you say to somebody like Yunina, um, let's go fabricate. Let's find a connection between quantum mechanics and signal processing, and then you start sort of one idea leads to another, and you get someplace. And the same thing with the bowling ball. The way I phrased it to Tom Barron, who was a student, is I said, I started out by saying, do you realize how smart a bowling ball is? And of course, that got his attention. He said, what do you mean? And I said, you take a bowling ball up to the top of a hill, you let it go, and in real time, it's solving the partial differential equations to find the minimum energy path to the bottom. That is amazing. In fact, couldn't you call that artificial intelligence? Now,
wow.
uh, well, I don't know. Have you ever heard this is a very old joke in the early days of artificial intelligence. There was a joke going around, and I'll shorten it by just focusing it down. But you ask a person in artificial intelligence what the most amazing discovery was in their field. And the answer is hands down, it's the thermos bottle.
What is
the
thermos bottle?
Thermos bottle. Yeah, what's the thermos? Yeah, well, think about it. Think about it, Roy. You take a thermos bottle, and in the winter, you put hot tea in it, and it stays hot. And in the summer, you put iced tea into it, and it stays cold. How does it know? And by the way, that is one of the issues currently that makes AI kind of a little dangerous, is the terminology sometimes that people use to attach to, well, think about deep learning. the neural net's not learning anything. I mean, learning is learning suggests intelligence. It's not learning. I mean, an adaptive signal processing system, you could say, is learning, but it's not learning in sort of the human sense. But when we attach some of this terminology to it, like, how does the thermos bottle know? Yeah, isn't that amazing? Unless
I
you understand the underlying property.
Yes, but I think again, there are some things that I think that I disagree with you. Unfortunately, two weeks ago, I gave a lecture about artificial intelligence to ultra-Orthodox rabbis in Israel, and I told them, listen, this is what artificial intelligence does right now, okay? And I tried, to explain a little bit about the math, about the engineering, about, how one can utilize artificial intelligence in many disciplines. For example, in medical diagnosis, okay? And GPT-4 is doing not bad work right now. And the idea that they were terribly afraid, I'm also an Orthodox, okay? But but I treat things differently. Some of them were totally afraid that it's going to be like the new God. No, it's not. It is not learning like we do. Okay, yes, it doesn't learn, but like we. But nevertheless, it has something that you can't say no. It's just a mechanical computer. But I want, with your permission, Al, to steer away and to again quote Yonina, because what you said to Yonina is, you have 4 years to pursue a goal which neither I nor you know whether this goal is possible, the connection between quantum mechanics and artificial and digital signal processing. And when Yonina was asked about this, she said the following things. She said that, just a second. No, okay. She said that your open-ended questions could be discouraging, but you know that he's done this a million times before. It's actually motivating, even though you really have no idea what you are looking for. So the idea is that this is frightening. This is very scary. Okay. I look at myself as a young mentor for students and say, I don't have the courage to pursue such long horizon task. Maybe it will fail. And my question is, how did you develop this courage?
Interesting. It's an interesting question.
Thank you.
And when sometimes students, I remember one particular student, and I told him sort of my process is, I'm going to push you way out on a limb, and you're going to be out there, and that limb is just moving around and around. He said to me, well, what happens if I fall? And I said, I'm running around underneath with a safety net. Kind of like the Outward Bound experience. They put you out there in the woods and you have to eat bugs and stuff like that. Or the IDF Special Forces training. I mean, but there are also people back there watching to make sure you just don't die. And I guess what I've learned over the years is I ended up being able to think creatively enough to navigate from one idea sort of and morph it into other ideas. But it's wonderful to watch how many students, if they're willing to go out on that limb, like Yonina was, and a bunch of others that I've had, they open their minds up to new, creative, exciting ideas. So my answer to the student when he said, but I might fall and die, I said, I haven't lost one yet.
yet. But again, this part of the talk is basically not about you. It's really about me. I want to learn from your experience and from your expertise and from your philosophy. And there is like a little voice inside me that said, listen, Al is in MIT, which is like one of the top universities in the world. Yonina told me that in MIT, Al Oppenheim has the privilege to pick, like cherry pick, all the creme de la creme students, and maybe your approach works well with like 0.001% of the population. But maybe, and I don't work with 0.001% of the population, I myself don't include in this 0.001%. But maybe there are some insights that I can get from you, even though that I'm not in the high atmosphere where you live.
I totally get your point. And let me say, first of all, that a lot of students would be very uncomfortable with my approach. And a lot of students I would not be able to work with a lot of students. Because when a student comes to me for a PhD and they say, tell me an open problem in your field so that I can just do all the math and then solve your problem, I have no interest in that student. I want students who are willing to go way out on a limb, like Yonina. And there's a lot of it with the student has to do with sort of mindset. You know, often I made the statement to myself, to my students, to my son and daughter, every problem has a solution. The question is, are we creative enough to find the solution? When you put yourself in that mindset, it's like flipping a switch as compared with, I don't see where I can go with that idea. And in fact, I've had that conversation recently with another student. And it was amazing how he kind of broke out of feeling like he can't get any place to all of a sudden he's got these ideas. So, you know, I that's kind of related to what I call the power of positive thinking. If you think there's a solution, then you're likely to come up with a really good solution. And it is true that every problem has a solution.
Would you say that, you know, I was once had a conversation with a CEO, and the CEO told me something like this. He said, an engineer can't say it's impossible. He can't say it will be very expensive. It will be very hard to do it. It won't be efficient, but he can't say it's impossible. You got to find a way around, underneath, below, I don't know. And in some sense, it is very similar to magic, because magic, and you and I share the same love to this great art or craft. Magic is about finding solution to impossible problems by definition. And the mindset that one has when building or designing a new magic trick is, how do I do the impossible? And I think that magic and engineering are very strongly correlated. This is all about how to control nature, and this is all about how to find problems or how to find solutions to, in a way, impossible problems. Let's say that Yonina most recent thing is, it's not most recent, but you know, a sub-Nyquist sampling. Okay, there is a theory that you can't do that you can't do something. A theory, a mathematical theory, a mathematical proof that you know, maybe we can.
Well, wait a minute. The theory is,
I know we didn't clash the theory, but the idea is that even, the courage to go in that
exactly
direction,
right.
that which is mathematically impossible.
No. It's not mathematically impossible. It appears impossible because you're not not you, but one is not paying close enough attention to the conditions under which it says it's impossible. So, let me just comment about magic for a second. Designing a magic trick is taking something that's is possible, but making it appear impossible by presenting it in a way where people assume side constraints that just are not part of it.
With your permission, let me beg to differ. I really want to beg to differ because I think this is really a strong part of my life. And what you say is absolutely correct in the way that what magicians do is possible because they do it. But I think that my favorite example is, sticking a needle into a balloon. Okay. Now, when they came up with balloon, everyone knew that when you stick a needle into a balloon, it pops. Okay. But only magicians say, okay, this is impossible. And they started with the impossible problem, not with a solution. Say, okay, how can I figure out a way to achieve this impossible problem? Any magic effect starts, any decent magic effect starts with the definition of an impossible problem. And if it's not impossible, it's not magic. What magicians do is like how to get over the impossibility. And this is a mindset of, I want to design something that will appear impossible. So you are dealing with an impossible problem.
And I agree with everything you said. I don't know if you've come across my quote about
magic is simple thing, magic versus teaching.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I mean, one of the things, and I suspect you've read the article that my magic.
I told you, Al, I came prepared.
Yeah. So in there's the important kind of aspect of the closing doors and opening doors, and I mean, one of the tricks of designing a trick or presenting a trick is making sure that you fool, I don't want to use the word fool, make it appear to the audience that it's impossible by not being totally honest with them about what the balloon is made out of, for example, or whatever. But by the way, I think the thing about us, you and me, as teachers and magicians, and I don't claim I'm a really good magician. It's a hobby, but
you can say that we are both magicians and we are both researchers. And I'm not your researcher, you are not my magician.
Yeah. But the thing is that the thing about magic is you kind of it's a way of getting somebody's attention because they think you did something that's impossible.
Yes.
Now you had another topic on your list which was mentoring.
Yes, I think that, the idea of mentoring is, and this is exactly what I wanted to ask you, what lesson have we learned during your 40 years of experience when a student is stuck on the limb right now, stumbling around, don't know where to go? What can you do as a mentor, as a supervisor, as an advisor, as a big brother to help him get out of this cloud?
I mean, one thing very clearly, because this was true of all the mentors that I had, is to the extent that you believe it, make it clear to them that you believe in them. Now, if you don't believe in them, don't fake it. But very often students sort of get their perspective gets warped because they think everybody else is smarter than them. You know, the imposter syndrome issue. They're stuck and they don't know how to break out of it. And that's why, I have all these mantras that I kind of like, because they're sort of like one-liners that
1 + 1 = 3.
Well, yeah, 1 + 1 = 3. That was one of them, and Yunina turned that into a Dr. Seuss line.
Yes,
she probably told you this. Yeah, right.
No,
but,
I read it in one of the papers.
Okay, so actually, can I give you an example that I am actually going to? That is part of my talk at ICAST, but in 2 weeks.
It's guys, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert. It's going to be in ICAST in 2 weeks. Yes, definitely. I will love to.
Oh, you'll be there?
No, unfortunately, no. I'm sorry. I didn't send the paper and I wasn't fast enough. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, there's a statement, and you've seen it on various of the stuff I've written. No news is bad news. And do you know what that means?
Usually we say no news, good news, but no news, bad news.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
What it means is news is news. What you make of that news can be good or bad depending on what you make of it. So when you get disappointing news, it's very energizing. And that energy can be used to complain, to feel sorry for yourself, to punch a hole in a wall, or you can say, I'm ticked off. I am going to turn this into something positive. Let me just give you an example, which is what I'm going to actually be giving as commenting on it at ICAST. So in 1966, I was finishing my first appointment at MIT on the faculty, which was a 2-year appointment. And my department chairman said to me, Professor Oppenheim, we are going to reappoint you for another 2 years, but you have no chance of getting tenure. That's bad news.
Yeah.
As it happened, I was interacting closely with people who, like Tom Stockham and Ben Gold, who were among the pioneers of digital signal processing. They were at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. I decided I'm just going to take a leave of absence and go out to Lincoln and work with them. And that was right at the beginning of DSP. And we were like kids in a candy store, with all these ideas that were floating around, exciting stuff and everything else. if my department had not told me that I wasn't going to get tenure, I almost certainly would not have gone out to Lincoln. And I almost certainly then would not have been right at the beginnings of DSP. So what seemed like bad news turned out to be the most wonderful news I could have gotten.
But what can I get from this story? I can get that God takes us in a very special road, each one of us, and we don't know at the time of happening, maybe this bad news would emerge or will convert into very wonderful news in years to come. This is great. And this is a very positive message. I all in, okay? But my question was, let's say that there is bad news in the experiment right now. How can you cheer up your student, to say, okay, we move on, we move forward? Because maybe it's the bad news that he didn't finish the PhD and he moved to work in Silicon Valley and he became multimillionaire. Could also be turned on event. But as a supervisor, as an advisor, how can you push, or how can you push your students in the right track, or right, as you can see it?
Well, but you don't know what the right path is. But what you can say to a student is, this is a fact. So you have to accept the fact, whatever the fact was. My girlfriend left me, or I got an F in this course, or whatever. That's a fact. Now, the question is, what can you how do you move forward? So depending on the specific circumstances, there are lots of ways of exploring it. But I think the important thing is getting the student out of the feeling sorry for themselves mindset and into the mindset of, this is a fact. Now, let's make the best out of it that we can.
Okay.
I mean, my son is a clinical psychologist, and I've had exactly this conversation with him as he's talking about some of his patients. The fact is the fact, and if you didn't finish the PhD, you didn't finish the PhD. Now, that can be very energizing, and it can be energizing. It says, I'm going to go start a PhD all over again, or I have to recognize that I was not well suited for the PhD program, and that's important information to me.
I think, that the most sad revelation that I had in the last 20 years regarding math is what I was trying to read Fermat's theorem, not the popular book, but the Springer hard science book. And then it came to me that although I love mathematics, I'm not good enough to do math. And say, okay, this is fact. I need to embrace this fact. And I need, in this life, okay, I might contribute to society, to humanity in some other aspect. Also, I love math. I just don't good at math.
Exactly. And what comes to mind is one of the things that conversations I've had with students when they're kind of had a disappointment is, let's think about, what are your strengths? And let's see if understanding your strengths can suggest the right path forward. And, it could be that maybe you didn't like math, but you're a heck of a basketball player. Well, maybe your career, maybe you're well cut out for being a professional athlete more than being a mathematician. That's an extreme example, but what comes to mind is Michael Jordan
And golf,
was,
and golf.
yeah, but he wasn't a very good hockey player.
Yes, the idea is that, I think there is like Scott Adams, the originator of Gilbert, and he said, some people are immensely good at one thing, okay, like the top MIT professors, like the best of the best, but most of us not. And if you can be like 80% good in one thing and 80% good in that thing, and then you have two things, and the Venn diagram is very narrow, and you can say, okay, and Scott Adams say, I'm not the most funny guy in the room, I'm not the best artist in the room, but I do a little bit of that, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, and that combinations, the fusion creates something new. So many people don't reach to the highest level of performance possible, but they can incorporate two things. It's like the frog. It's not the fastest animal on land, it's not the fastest animal on sea, but it can do both.
Well, that's exactly right, and I think that's really right on. One of my, often when I'm working with a PhD student, progress takes lots of very different forms. But one form that progress with a PhD student could take is they've done sort of really nice small pieces of work, but they can get discouraged but what is my thesis? And the metaphor that I often use for that is a patchwork quilt. You familiar with what I mean by a patchwork quilt?
No, I'm sorry.
Well, a patchwork quilt is, somebody who makes, let's say, typically, you think historically, women, they design little patches that are kind of attractive, but they don't know what they're going to do with it. And then they design another one, and not sure what they're going to do. And they got a bunch of these beautiful little patches. Now, the question is, how do you put all the patches together into a beautiful quilt? And so then sometimes the one that's the centerpiece eventually is actually the first one you made, or maybe it's the last one you made. But there's the whole phase of putting the thesis together where you now take these individual pieces that you had and you then combine them into a beautiful design.
And there is a great book by Stephen Johnson. It says where good ideas come from. And what Stephen Johnson said, that most of the times you have the full idea, you have many little ideas, and you have the full idea, but you're unaware of this big idea. In it, sometimes it's like the slow hunch. It takes you time until you understand what you have in your hand. You had all the pieces in the puzzle.
Yeah. So, helping a student to think like that is important. And if they when they don't feel like their thesis is getting any place, it's often or sometimes because they've lost perspective on what a thesis could look like, or they might have solved a particularly difficult problem, but then they minimized the beauty of it. And getting them to step back and, just kind of laying out for them or having them lay out, well, what are all the pieces that I've done? And now how can I combine these together into a beautiful patchwork quilt?
So let me ask you a final question regarding what we just said. And in one of your articles, you said the following thing. In the context of research, once it looks like a problem set in a course, the hard part is done. This is what you wrote, okay? So again,
yes,
once your thesis, once your idea, yeah, again, we are chasing of ideas, not solutions. Once it looks like a problem set in a course, the hard part is done. And this is exactly what you said before. When a student approached you and said, give me an open problem in your realm, you say, just go away. I don't want this kind of attitude. And my question is, how long, on average, does it take from the first encounter with the student until the problem can't be described as what you said,
as a problem set.
As a problem set in a course? How long? It's going to be 2 years, 3 years, 1 year, approximately.
Okay, well, here's the way I think about that.
Okay.
Roughly, to do a PhD thesis is 3 years, more or less. That's the time frame. The first year, I sort of think of, now this is a thesis where we're chasing an idea, like the bowling ball or the quantum mechanics. The first year, I tend to think of as what I refer to as vacuum cleaner mode. So vacuum cleaner mode is, you're just sucking in ideas. You're not committing to exactly the path you're going to take. You're trying to keep your mind open and as creative as possible. Now, I think it's our job as a mentor to watch that process very carefully. And it could be that in that first year, there's just absolutely the definition of the problem set. And then you spend the next 2 years doing that problem set. That's happened on occasion. More typically, you have to sort of watch it. And as you get into sort of the second year, you really have to start narrowing it down.
You had a wonderful quote regarding exactly what you just said, which is motion is not progress. Sometimes we have motion, but this motion doesn't imply progress. This is a great quote. So we think that we have motion, but we are moving in circles. And this is your part, your job as the mentor to say, listen, be aware.
Yeah, right. And, I went through this recently with another student that, you've got to start trimming the problem down, trimming down, let's say, the patches that you're making as patchwork quilts, and start getting things much better defined, because by the third year, or sometimes it's the fourth year, your thesis has to get finished. So the hope is that in the first year, in the beginning of the second year, you've let them be as expansive as possible, so that you get a sense of what their potential is, what their robustness is in terms of running into walls, etc. And then you start to have to start trimming it down. I mean, the thing with Yonina and many other students I've had, that Yonina is very exceptional. And it was just very clear, very early, that she could take it. And she would think amazingly creatively and energetically. And so then you it becomes more hands-off,
I just want to mention to my audience that Yonina Eldar is one of the top scientists in Israel, okay? So with all due respect to Mr. Al Oppenheim, she's not a good example. I'm sorry. She's exceptional. She's really exceptional. You can't sometimes, so maybe all of your students are bright, but Yunina is ultra bright.
No, I would say, as I think about my former PhD students, most of them are very special in very special ways. And then there's sort of a top group, in which I would clearly put Yunina, and I would clearly put a bunch of other of my former PhD students. Yeah, so I mean, I've been very, very privileged to have had some really extraordinary students. I don't know if you've seen the mathematics genealogy tree, but I've got like 400 to 500 descendants in that tree. And quite a number of them are pretty extraordinary, very extraordinary.
I think, Al, that when we finish the conversation shortly, my homework will be how to apply what you just said about those exceptional students that you have to my life with my students, and how to apply, how to do the transform correctly. And this is going to be, this is a homework that I take from this conversation. What wisdom can I extract and use and utilize in my other life?
Well, I'll tell you, Roy, I'd be delighted to continue the conversation, not in the context of an interview, but I personally enjoy thinking about these kinds of things and learning from them. And you know, the more you think about them, the more you learn. I can tell you another one of my mantras that I like. I was an airline pilot, not an airline, but aircraft pilot for quite a number of years. And there's lots of very, very interesting one-liners or two-liners that you come across from flying. One of them is, it's very important periodically to operate at the edge of your comfort zone. Otherwise, your comfort zone shrinks.
Shrink, yes.
Yeah.
I once said about my wife, she's uncomfortable in the comfort zone. She's not being comfortable in the comfort zone. So,
yeah.
Which means that we have a very intense life. We have a very intense life because where someone is uncomfortable in the comfort zone, this is a very serious problem.
Well, yeah, and I got it. I totally got it. So, you know, if sometime you're up for it, continuing this aspect of the conversation on the phone, on Zoom or whatever, I'd be delighted to do it.
First, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful, like a roller coaster of so many things and so many inspiring things. And again, I know you, like many of my guests, as a book, but now I can speak with the book. And don't be offended, but what you said right now is much more interesting than I'm sorry. There is two questions that I like, two final questions that I ask all my guests. One is, could you mention one or two books that you read in the last 10 years that made an impact on you? It doesn't have to be like in the signal processing, but you just any books that you say, wow, made a difference.
Right. So I'll mention two. I could mention more than two, but one is the book Imagine.
Imagine by who?
I'm trying to remember the name of the author. if you can you just Google
Yeah,
imagine and
yeah,
you'll
yeah. I'm on Amazon right now. Imagine me, I say. No, it's not.
it's called Imagine, a very interesting story. And that book, and all your students should read the book, even though the book was taken out of print, because unfortunately the author made up a quote that wasn't true. And then it turns out he has a reputation for a certain amount of plagiarism. So you set that aside.
This
That
is by
book
Eric
is
Cohen.
no.
How
Let me.
Creativity Works by John Allaire. Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Ah,
By Lehrer.
John Allaire. Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. I know. How Creativity Works. Oh, this is a great book, and it is also in Hebrew. John Allaire. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. John Allaire. Yes. Imagine How Creativity
yeah.
Works. Oh,
Creative. Yeah, right.
this is a great book. Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, that's a must read.
I think that the first chapter is about dopamine. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I read this book. This is a great book. Yes, by
Yeah,
John Allaire.
and
And the second book.
and the second one, which actually I'm just finishing reading, is An Immense World. Uh, it's called An Immense World. Yeah, you just saw it.
By Ed
Yeah,
Young.
yeah, that book. It's
How animal sense
fascinating.
reveal hidden realms in the world. Wow.
It's fascinating.
And it's new from 2022. Oh, so
Yeah.
we have Imagine and An Immense World, how animal sense reveals the hidden realms about us, around us. And the last question is, could you please give me, it was a productivity YouTube channel in the past. Could you like just one or two of your productivity tips regarding how you write papers or how you write, how can, what is your best tip to become more productive?
Oh, well, this is something I've do you know what's the title of that book? It's a book on time management, and
We have a book by Stephen Covey about time
no,
management.
by Alan Laken. Alan Laken, and it has some there are typical sort of ways of how to manage your time, but one of the things that really had an impact on me, and I used to give copies of this book to every student that I had. So people have often asked me, how can you write a book? It's such an immense task.
Just a second. You mean how to get control of your time and your life by Alan
That's
Laken.
it. How to get control of your time in your life. Yeah.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
So the answer when somebody, yeah, that's it. And
okay.
The thing to get your hands on, if you can, is the first edition of it. Yeah, you can see there that
by
it first came out
1989.
No, so you can see the one 1974.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, because he rewrote it.
So the first edition, how to get control of your time in life, from the first edition, 1974. So what one tip could you extract from this book?
Yep. So one tip that you can, if you're, let's say you're doing a PhD thesis, which is an enormous job, or you're writing a book, and you got 15 minutes between now and a meeting that you have. I mean, how could you possibly make progress on your book in 15 minutes? Well, of course you can make progress on your book in 15 minutes, because there's always a reference you want to look up, a figure you want to draw, an example you want to flesh out. So too often people waste too many small snippets of time because they haven't thought about how can I use that time productively.
And this was before social media and smartphone, Al. So
what is that?
This was what you just said right now was before social media and smartphones and all the distractions that we have right now. So right now, nowadays with social media and iPhone and TikTok and all the things, get the 15-minute snippet of time and go find a reference instead of browsing TikTok demands, like a very strong personality.
Yeah, and this is one of the messages in Alan Laken's book. Is to make good use of these small snippets of time. And when somebody asks me, how in the world could I possibly write a book that's just so monumental a task? My answer has always been, on any given day, I'm not writing a book, I'm working on a chapter. And actually, I'm not working on the chapter, I'm working on a section. And actually, I'm not working on that section, I'm working on a
subsection.
Yeah, a subsection or an example. Because if you think about the project of the whole book, that can be very depressing. How in the world could I possibly get there? It's one step at a time.
Let me give you just a second.
Let me mention it. There's a documentary that I've mentioned to all of my students, and this had to do with two mountain climbers. And one of them had fallen down a crevasse. His climbing partner had to cut him loose. And this guy, everybody thought he was dead. And he had decided, he had two broken legs. He decided he was going to crawl the 3 miles back to the base camp. And in the documentary, what's said is, how in the world could you keep yourself motivated to crawl 3 miles with 2 broken legs? And he said, I couldn't. All I could do is motivate myself that my goal is to get to that rock. And then when I got to that rock, my goal was to get to the next rock. And that documentary, Touching the Void, I think was the title of it, something like that.
This is great. With your permission, I would like to end with some ancient Jewish wisdom. Before I got married, I was terrified. And I asked my friend, which was an ultra-Orthodox, and I said, listen, marriage is for lifetime. This is a strong commitment. How can you reconcile this? And said, no, this is not for lifetime. This is just for today. And tomorrow, this is going to be just for tomorrow. And you keep going like this. And I think this exact same ancient Jewish wisdom is correlated with what you just said. Al Oppenheim, thank you so much for your time, your effort, your energy, your wisdom, and your insights. I need to think a lot right now. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, and thank you for the discussion. I learned a lot from all that you said, and this was a tremendous amount of fun. So thank you very much, Roy.
Bye-bye. On this channel, you will see the authors of these books and many more having great conversations with me. Please subscribe, hit the bell button, and be part of this great community. See you in the next video.